We're going to watch another one. I don't know how much more time I have, but this might be the last one. I've got a few more, but I'll keep those in mind for the next time. No problem. Don't worry. We're going to watch one on the serial killer Nun. I don't know if that's going to be true or not. Crazy if that's real. From a channel called Twisted Minds. I think this might have been from the React channel. If you don't know already, I take suggestions for React streams and videos. So if you're not in Discord, join my Discord and then throw in videos you think are interesting in the React channel. They don't have to be true crime related, but we do like true crime. Obviously, it's fun to watch true crime. But anything would be great. You can suggest anything in the React channel, and it may or may not get played. And it's appreciated because it keeps the wheel turning. You know what I mean? Let's put on the captions and amp up the quality and see what the hell's going on with Mariam.
This woman on screen holds true stories like you wouldn't believe. She's been dubbed the most evil woman in the history of mankind. With both the appearance and profession of a full-time abbess, Mariam Solocutus deceived everyone around her for decades. Her main reasons? Money and power. By the end of her reign, Mariam Solocutus would be arrested and known as the Nun serial killer. This is no horror movie script. This is unfortunately a very real
I've
story.
never heard of this. I don't think. Also, I think that was AI, which is unfortunate.
Marina Solocutu
Gross.
was born in 1883 in Greece. Belonging to an impoverished family, she didn't have much to look forward to. So she continued to work at her family farm. Despite her humble background, Marina had high aspirations. She dreamt of a life of wealth and power.
I'm scared.
Some accounts suggest that Marina worked at a factory to earn daily wages for her family. It's easy to imagine what kind of life Marina was living before she became a nun. Waking up at dawn and having a simple breakfast, or maybe no breakfast at all, depending upon the availability of food in the house. Working on the farm could not have been fun for a teenage girl. Getting a job at a factory would not have made things any easier. However, she did not lose her grit, or better yet, the rigor to become a formidable personality. Since Marina didn't have many prospects for earning, she chose the one path that could help her make her dreams come true. She decided to become a nun and join the old Calandrous Church. Matthew Carpathakis was the head monk of the Calandrous Church when Marina was 23 years old. The meeting took place when Matthew was having trouble accepting the tenets of the old Calandrous Church. He was completely alienated from the teachings of the old church and decided to start a new convent. As luck would have it, Marina joined Matthew when he started his sect, called the New Calandrous Church, and Marina Solocutu became Mariam Solocutus. Who would know that the woman who took the pure name of Mariam would soon wreak havoc on the lives of the very people who followed and believed in the church? Of course, no one could predict what would become of the new Calandrous Church when Mariam took over. But the signs were not good. Mariam rose through the church
like
ranks
an AI
and
voice.
soon
I mean, it is showing him like talking.
The signs were not good. Mariam rose through the church ranks and soon became a confidant of the Archbishop Matthew of Viresnum.
I mean, we've heard a lot of people speak differently in these types of videos, so I don't know. I don't think that this is him. This is not an AI voice, I don't think. I don't think his mic is great, to be fair. Did you hear like his opening? It was like an immediate abrasion of sound. So it's like, I think it's just he's got a really weird speech pattern, which is not, you know, wrong. It's probably just putting on an acting front to narrate, which is like my concerns are the AI imagery. I dislike that. I think there are plenty thrown in. There was at least one that was obvious. The other ones are very like, I've seen edits that look like that, but maybe it's like that fed the AI to do it. So I'm a little skeptical, you know. I think a lot of people at this point has been victim of accidentally using or seeing AI and thinking it's real. I mean, that's benefit of the doubt, I guess. I don't like the constant fancy words. Does that make sense? That's a very like AI write this script for me. I hope that's not the case here. I don't know. I don't like, some people just do that. I mean, I've done that before where it's like, I want to use a bigger word here because I feel like there's a bigger word that is, you know, it's an elegant affront where it's like, I want to use a big word to sound better here. So I don't know. People use fancy words a lot. I'm not saying that that's guilty. It's just like something AI also does. So it's like also kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I don't like the AI imagery. I wish you know, I don't know. This was done in 23. Wait. AI stuff was around in 2023, wasn't it? I don't know about speech stuff. I know imagery processing was like generative AI. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's an older video, guys. It was definitely around then. I'm going to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt because I feel like the past 2 years especially have been getting people have become very serious about AI and how it's malicious intent. Generative AI. Obviously, there's AI that is good when people clump actual artificial intelligence into generative AI and think it's the same thing. You're really putting a huge blanket over a broad tree. There's a lot of AI that you use constantly that is very helpful. Alexa is AI, by the way. Sorry if I just turned yours on. Your phone, your Siri, that's AI. That's all AI. So, you know, that's a whole different tangent. I don't like when people generalize AI in general with generative AI, which is the image creation version that steals art and imagery from other places without consent, etc. So that's a totally different point. This is a 2-year-old video. I'm gonna give a little bit of a benefit of a doubt here and say that easily this could be within the time frame in which people were like, look how cool, before we were kind of like, oh, not cool at all, and in fact constantly getting worse. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know.
Matthew entered into a conflict with the old Calandrous church. Mariam was by his side. They laid the foundation of the Pana-yatopoulios Monastery, or the Convent of the Virgin, in the Pines in 1927, located between the town of Kirtea and the rural villages of Karke Thulasa. Matthew had been planning to set up his own monastery for the last few years, and Mariam helped to get him access to the land. She came into an additional 7 acres of land, and later that year, she acquired 2 more plots of land. No one knows how she was able to secure so much property. The Greek author Nila Koulataki writes, having reviewed long, sympathetic, Matthewite histories of the monastery,
Matthew White? What a weird name.
there is no legal explanation as to how the nuns acquired the money to make these expensive property purchases. The official announcement made by Matthew at the unveiling of the monastery was to honor the presentation of the Virgin Mary. However, the true reason for building the monastery was to gather funds desperately needed to support the old Calandrous movement. Both Miriam and Matthew...
Guys, I don't know how you can say, is this guy's voice AI generated? He's literally like, that's him right there. he's consistently cutting between this like one sentence to the other and showing himself. He's just, I just don't think he took public speaking, guys. Like, just to be a little critical, I don't think he took public speaking because the way he's like presenting is like,
well, 42 months.
and the nun that
I don't have anything
someone,
to say right now.
like
That's
it's very like
Delatroon party with friends was fun.
You know what I
Someone
mean?
made pipers. Watching
And
your
it's
VOD,
not-
we also named ourselves Ass with 10 Lamau.
it's
Also,
not like
yeah,
crazy.
Back when I first started,
It's a little
like, being
awkward. It's a
communist,
very
people
awkward
made a lot of
presentation.
content with it because they didn't really
What
realize
is-
the effects yet. Plenty of
what is
YouTubers
happening?
used it. Now like a tagger mods kill I. Also heard you were sick, I think.
Yeah.
Glad you're feeling better. Anyway, fart.
Eltern party with friends was fun. Someone made Pippus. Watching your VOD. We also named ourselves Ass when with Tena. Back when AI first started being common-ish, people made a lot of content with it. Didn't realize its effects yet. Yeah, true. Plenty of YouTubers did use it. Yes. I remember there was a moment where the people that edited for me used it, and I was like, dude, no. And I'm still a little convinced that the people that edited for me a little bit used it even to make the videos, because there's very awkward moments. But, you know, they never told me that. I had no idea. So, and I still don't have any proof of that. So don't think that's a direct, like, I know for sure I don't. So it, you know, there was a good, like 1 to 2 years after AI was made where people were very like liberal with its usage without understanding its dangers. And that's still happening. I think that the quantity of people doing that are much less, especially creators. This is a 2-year-old video almost to date. It's about 1 month from that. So who knows, guys? But I don't think his talking is AI. I just don't think he took a public speaking class, which is like, once again, not a problem. It's just a bit of a hard watch in that regard. And maybe he's gotten better. Who knows?
They were tactful in hiding their true intentions when they started this new convent. They were the face of honesty,
It's not that
integrity,
serious.
and faith.
Let's just see where the
for
story
the
goes,
very
not
people
continuously
who were
point out
innocent
his
enough to believe in them.
speaking being odd.
Faith was indeed the driving force for the
Some of
believers
y'all probably
of
speak
the
weird as
Murderous
hell.
movement. Of course, the movement would have continued to thrive if its proponents were as devoted as they seemed to be. Things might not have taken such a dark turn
Ugh.
if Mariam had the same faith as those around her.
What the fuck?
She
Yeah,
would
that's
not have
definitely
resorted
not-
to violence, extortion, and outright
What
blackmail
is that?
if she
man?
held on to her own faith. Building a monastery is not an easy task, especially when you have limited funds. The fact that Mariam and Matthew were able to build a monastery from scratch seemed
That was absolutely,
miraculous, not to say the least. None of the founding nuns came from money, so how did they collect all the church
That was a white Jesus. That has to be AI.
resources? The mysterious funding had a gruesome truth at its core, which would soon come to the surface. The Convent of the Virgin in Pine was advertised as a healing center for tuberculosis, or TB. The monastery was built at a high altitude, and since there wasn't a cure for TB at the time, people who did not have the means to get medical treatment came to the
What a
monastery
cool
as a
looking
safe
monastery.
haven.
I doubt that's
People
real.
started to come to the monastery in throngs,
probably also AI.
so they could heal themselves, and Mariam welcomed them with pleasure.
Praying that
Although
this
there
guy
was
has
no
learned his
particular
lesson
medical
by
facility
now.
available at the monastery, people were excited to venture into the fold of this new sect. Mariam would settle
Like,
multiple
I don't understand it because look how much this is. Obviously an old photo, right? Why not just stick to that? These are very fascinatingly old photos. You know what I mean? You don't have to. You don't have to do all that shit. Like, just go back to your face if you don't have an image to use, or find anything. I mean, it's entirely possible, guys. Once again, because the normalization of AI is so insidious and continues to be, I'm not convinced that it wasn't a thing happening for years prior to its normalization in 21, like with ChatGPT and stuff. I'm convinced there was things being done and doing it beforehand. And in fact, generative AI has gotten so bad that if you Google something very, very basic, it's almost guaranteed, or even something complex, it's almost guaranteed that half of the images are going to be AI photos because it's so bad. And it's entirely possible he just Google image searched without realizing that half the shit he was using is, or I don't know. We don't know.
To venture into the fold of this new sect. Mariam would settle
Not a great
multiple
look, regardless,
patients in
but yeah.
a single room. She would not let any doctors visit the patients unless they had to sign a death certificate.
Oh boy.
This negligent practice
Not
would have
great.
gone unnoticed if Mariam had not started another gruesome practice at her monastery. Meanwhile, Mariam was enjoying the spotlight of the new Murderous church. Archbishop Matthew was already aging when the monastery was built, reaching the age of 66, while Mariam was in the prime of her youth. She saw how Matthew ran the activities of the monastery. She had to take over some of the responsibilities when Matthew was taken to prison. After he came back, he continued on a spiritual journey as a Hiro monk. He would do 40-day fasts and stay in isolation to get close to God. While Matthew was going through his spiritual journey with heavy metal chains tied around his waist, his apprentice decided to put others under duress. Little did Matthew know that the sweet-looking Mariam would turn out to be a tyrant in his own monastery. When Matthew was on his
the nun
deathbed,
priests that are
Archbishop
clearly AI in the background.
Chrysostomos of Florina came to visit him. The Archbishop wanted to bury the hatchet and possibly end the division in the Murderous church. Before Matthew could try to say anything to Chrysostomos, Mariam barged into the room with all the nuns and told them to leave. We can only speculate how the healing of the division would have came about. We can never know what kind of effects it would have had on the future of the Murderous church, as Mariam had snuffed out all hope for an agreement. Archbishop Matthew's health had started to decline in 1939, and Mariam was now in charge
like an
of the
angel of
monastery.
death situation.
By this point in Matthew's life, he was only a shadow of his former self. He had to rely on Mariam to
Yeah,
make
he's old and
important
sick.
decisions, and soon left everything under her supervision. After waiting for 11 years, Mariam was finally given the title of Mother of Mariam of Kiratea. Her lifelong ambition of gaining control was complete. She was the abbess of the Fef Kunogo Trisa Monastery. She would wear the
What a word.
Greek-style
Pef Kuvono Geostry. Wow.
cloth head covering, a black veil that covered her forehead and eyebrows. This piece of clerical clothing was only worn by high-ranking Eastern Orthodox nuns. She had decided to gather as much wealth as she could. She did not care what method she had to use to get the job done. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when Mariam descended into murderous wrath. However, it is evident that she started her ascetic practices soon after she became an abbess. Her strong character had evolved into a formidable force. She wanted to amass as much wealth for her monastery as she could. When the news of Mariam's activities was made public, she was named Mother Rasputin by the media.
Damn. Rhymes.
Donating to charity may seem like the most humane thing a person can do, but
Well, yeah,
what if
if
that
the
donation is
if the people taking it actually puts it where it's supposed to go.
based on fear? That is exactly what Mariam did. Her crimes went far beyond the suspicions of illegal imports that she was first convicted of. She had destroyed a number of lives by trying to treat patients suffering from TB. With many people suffering from isolation and pain, Mariam was involved in hundreds of negligent homicides. She collected millions of dollars worth of property in the names of girls' dowries. She could first trap a wealthy family by promising them salvation. If they did not agree, she would tie them up in her basement and torture them until they succumbed to her wishes. She would lock people up until they died of starvation. Nobody knows exactly how many people were doomed to the fate obtained by the abbess of the monastery, but
Doesn't
a
sound very
total
pious
of
to me.
27 murders were estimated by the Greek police. Mr. and
my.
Mrs. Becca were devout followers of the Calandrous Church. They were impressed by the courage shown by the Archbishop Matthew and his monastery. Mrs. Becca's theological bent toward the church led her to studying with Mariam Solacutus.
Because I'm starting to think Miriam's
Alas,
not a good person.
she was not aware of the horrendous practices of the so-called abbess. She had already pledged her whole property to the church, but when she realized that Mariam was resorting to violence to get her way, she tried to leave with her 2 children. Mariam couldn't bear to lose such a golden opportunity and locked Mrs. Becca in a cell. Mrs. Becca was forced to live in a cell where patients with TB had died. She would wail and cry out for help, but no one could hear her pleas. Since the monastery was on top of a mountain, it proved to be the perfect dungeon for Mariam's diabolical plans. She would only allow a few mouthfuls of food to be given to the imprisoned Mrs. Becca. When Mariam decided to release Mrs. Becca, the woman was a mere shell of her former self. She fell into a coma, and Mariam did not do anything to help the woman. Instead, she let Mrs. Becca rot and die in the prison she called the monastery. Mr. Becca was also placed in isolation until he fell ill and succumbed to a lonely and painful death.
My God.
Imagine visiting a monastery to get spiritual enlightenment and then coming back with nothing but an empty bank account. Unfortunately, the next victims, Mr. and Mrs. Pana-yatopoulios, were not lucky enough to get away with their lives or their home. Mariam told them that they would be cleared of all their sins if they joined her. Instead, she held them hostage and starved them until they put their property in Mariam's name.
Right.
Mariam was not one to leave loose threads and decided that it would be best if the Pana-yatopoulios would leave this world once and for all. Getting a TB diagnosis was a death sentence in the early 1900s. Doctors could only lessen the patient's pain as they had no cure. Miss Michalakou received her death sentence when she was told she had TB. When she heard the convent of the Virgin was offering treatment for her disease, she was overjoyed. When she arrived at the monastery, she was expecting some type of spiritual treatment. She was horrified when the nuns took her to a cell and left her there. She wasn't given any medicines and was only fed a few tiny meals. Soon, Miss Michalakou began to get weaker. She suffered the same.
You know how I know that this is like just not good presentation skills? It's because he refers to them by their proper name every time. Every time. There's no she, there's no he, there's no they, there's no they did it, we, anything. It's always Miriam, Mrs. Insert whoever this fucking nun tortured here. Like, it's always the proper name, except right as I pause, there's a she. But right after, there's 2 she's in the sentence I just paused, but it's right after referring to her in her full name, Miss Michalakou. Like, except then he'll just go
Miss
to Mariam.
Michalakou began to get weaker. She suffered the same fate as many others under Miriam's ruthless supervision. She died alone and in agony, without a single loved one by her side. I
feel like kind of a painful watch. I mean, like, I get it. I don't know. The deliveries are killing me. Just like this is going to be a big one. It's going to be a moment. Like, it's just say what happened, man. You don't have to be like, she died alone with no one. And then her husband died alone with no one. It's come on, man. Duh. That's kind. Duh. She was put in a jail cell by herself. That's kind of implied. It's just very like in saying more to say more when the more you're adding is like already kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's redundant. It's just redundancies. Yeah.
Not everyone living under Mariam's rule was happy with the way she conducted her business. Sister Theodote tried to speak out against the abbess's cruel method, but Mariam was not one to take this lightly. She accused Sister Theodote of misconduct and ordered that the nuns should be beaten as a punishment. The rest of the nuns had no choice but to follow the orders. They beat Sister Theodote until she suffered an internal hemorrhage. She died on the spot because of the intense beating and had paid her penance for disagreeing with the abbess.
It's very interesting because it's like reading comprehension, right? Like when there isn't a second person involved, he'll go to the improper noun, right? But he'll clarify which person with their proper name if there's like, especially when it's Mariam and another female, like he makes sure that he's referring to Sister Theodote. But I'm like, that's reading comprehension skills, man. Like you sound, it's extremely redundant when you consistently refer to somebody as their proper name. That's why when you read like books, if the writer feels like, or quotes, if the writer or quoter or the article feels like it needs to be clarified who's being referred to, rather than say Sister Theodote every time, they just put in brackets like who it is, right? Or who that's referencing, right? Like it's I mean, it's just a grammar issue. It's a reading comprehension thing. Like, if somebody can't pick up that there's two females in this equation here, Mariam and the other nun, the abbess and the nun. One, he could just refer to her as the abbess and the other sister as a nun. It's giving Cusco's poison. Yeah, like a normal person probably fucking gets it. Like, it's a way to sound like you know what you're talking about, but you just sound like you don't know how to form a sentence. This is not how you would talk to somebody. That's exactly what the problem is here. Is like, and this guy's putting in way more effort than I have in my life. So, less, not super, like, I'm just saying that, like, this is an example of, like, a presentation, not a conversation. This is like your middle school brother giving a presentation to the school and the parents and everybody and making sure that they sound like they're smart, when it's like, you shouldn't present as if you're not just having a conversation. You sound unnatural and awkward because you're speaking very inhuman when you don't use proper speaking patterns that have developed culturally over time, grammatically over time. You don't sound correct. Not that there's a correct way to sound. Don't come after me like that. But this is what I'm saying, is like, when there's a second person in the equation, he has to clarify the exact person by their full name every time. You don't have to do that. A person should have enough reading comprehension to be like, well, it says she put her in the prison and she died in the prison. So did she put herself in the prison and die? If only there was a full name for me to know who is who. We're talking about a nun who killed people. So we're going to assume the first she is the nun who's killing people, and the second she is the person who got killed, right? That's reading comprehension. That's just basic reading, right? That's why when we talk to people, we don't do that. We don't refer to somebody in the third person every time and in their proper name, because we can process a sentence with other context and clues and previous statements without needing guidance every sentence. It's like he's holding our hand every sentence to make sure we're following along, and all that does is make it sound super disingenuous and over complex. And in fact, it can get more confusing and more drawn out and more boring because you're not talking like a person. You're talking like a computer presenting data, which nobody wants to hear. Nobody really wants to hear that. Nobody wants to listen to that.
Anyone who tried to stand against Mother Rasputin would face her wrath. Sister Maria also spoke out against Mariam and was punished with a ruthless beating. When she arrived at the hospital, she was injured beyond recognition. She had internal bleeding, with her vital organs
nobody else
damaged.
is involved in this sentence.
The
So he's
doctors
saying
tried to
she.
save her life, but no form of medical treatment can compensate for the brutality meted out by Mariam Solocutis. Sister Maria took her last breath and was finally released.
You see what I'm saying? There's two people in that sentence,
Been
so he had to
watching
clarify
VODs
by full
and busy
name.
with stuff, but hey
He
guys,
could just say
I
she
happen.
died. Obviously, we're talking about the person who was suffering and dying of a disease. You can just say she died, and people would be like, "Okay, that's the victim," not Miriam out of nowhere. There's no necessity. You can definitely put Miriam there. That's fine, but her full name, it's like. I don't
from
know.
the clutches
I feel like I'm
of the
nitpicking,
clanderous
but like.
church.
Yeah, it's just
The
not. It's
Clanders
redundant.
Church
It's
denied that
redundant.
Mariam Solocutis had anything to do with the murders. However, there have been multiple witness statements that say otherwise. Solocutis would lure innocent people into her monastery and promise them salvation. Instead, they would be tied up in a basement and forced to transfer all of their property to Mariam's name.
That was already said.
Mariam was tried for 7 murders. Authorities estimated that she had killed at least 27 people by starvation, negligent homicides, and beatings in the name of penance. Religious figures hold authority over people. Mariam Solocutis' crimes went undetected because no one believed that she could be capable of such villainy. Had she been an ordinary woman, things would have been completely different. As luck would have it, Mariam continued to send monks all across Greece to find wealthy spinsters, widows, and families. She would lure these innocent believers into donating to the monastery and steal the donations. One day, the police received an anonymous tip. The source informed the police that an elderly woman had donated all of her property to the monastery. The woman's daughter was certain that her mother would not have pledged the money without being forced. This accusation was not enough.
Do you notice how he speaks it properly when he's not referring to people as their actual name? He's just talking about a witness and her mom. Like this is all he has to say, and contextually, a person should have enough of a brain to put it
Had
together,
donated
right?
all of her property to the monastery.
Inform the police an elderly woman had
Informed the
donated
police that an elderly woman had donated all of her property
Her
to the monastery. The woman's daughter was certain that her mother
her
would
mother. Like, the woman's daughter was certain that she would not have like,
pledged the money without being forced. This accusation was not enough to put Mariam
really
under
like
arrest.
it's so
The police started
overcomplicated.
investigating Mariam's mysterious sources of wealth.
Just
They
say
discovered that the
her.
abbess was involved in the illegal
There's one
import
person
of
in the
olive oil
equation.
and other spices. However, the charge of illegal imports was not enough to arrest a high-profile figure like Mariam. After some time, a woman named
God.
Eugenia Margetta came forward stating that she was held in isolation by the monastery's abbess. She further alleged that she had been tortured to surrender her property worth $118 million, which was equivalent to $80,000 US at the time. In 1949, Christos Spirides went to the Greek police searching for his daughter, Samila Spirides, who went missing that year.
That is such
The
an
FBI
awkward
traced
sentence.
Samila back to the monastery.
Why would you?
The father of the 18-year-old girl said that he had been convinced by a nun named Mariam to give away property worth $10,000 US. He told the police that the nun had visited the United States to collect the property donated to the monastery. The Associated Press later revealed that Christo was reunited with his daughter. The police continued to investigate the allegations made against Mariam Soulakoutas. They found out that the monastery practiced asceticism and did not allow any doctors to treat patients suffering from TB. Almost 150 people died due to the absence of medical treatment while they were staying at the monastery. As the investigation continued, the police discovered various victims who talked about the abbess who used to beat them for small misdemeanors.
Right.
Who the fuck is that?
She was in the habit
Ew.
of locking up her victims in solitary
Fucking AI
confinement.
is so stupid.
Those
bro.
who survived revealed how Mariam used to stare at
got
them
him.
until they would crumble and transfer their properties in her name.
Oh my lord.
The news agency Reuters reported at the time of her arrest, Mariam had almost 300
This
homes
is getting
and
to be a
farms in
tough
her
watch.
name.
I really can't lie.
Moreover, she had collected gold and jewels worth thousands of pounds during her treacherous reign as Mother Rasputin. On the night of the 4th of December, 1950, when Mariam Soulakoutas was sound
Just
asleep
say
in her
she.
magnificent chambers,
Just say she.
the police entered the monastery. A total of 85 police officers searched the grounds of the monastery. They had anticipated the murders committed by Mariam and brought a deputy prosecutor, a judge, and a coroner with them. The operation lasted throughout the night. They rescued 36 children. The police had to
my.
physically grab
God,
the
here he
children
comes
from the
again.
hands of the nuns. According to the police, they were also rescued.
Oh my god.
Several
Stop using AI, bro.
half-naked,
I don't know if you'll see
malnourished,
this shit. Stop
and
using
sick
AI. It's
elderly
awful looking.
women tied up in basements.
Like the
case of
shitty
Mariam
images and the
Soulakoutas
frame
was
rate
extremely
of the
sensitive.
shitty AI
The
is like
prosecutors were not
destroying
sure
me. Like,
whether they would be
please
able to
stop.
convict her on the charges
Just
of fraud
awful.
and
I hope-
embezzlement. They began her trial under the
Oh,
charge of
God.
importing illegal olive oil and tires. However, the authority of the Calandrous
There's so
Church would
much.
soon end. Mariam's worship, called the Matthewites, was outlawed in January 1951. The Archbishop Spiridion Vlachos of Athens and the Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina could not reconcile their differences. The old Calandrous Church was dismantled, and Mariam could not use religion as an excuse for her heinous crimes. The public prosecutor was free to indict the ruthless nun, and he did not spare a single detail of her life of crime.
Notice how when there's two different genders, he's doing it properly, right? One, doesn't say the prosecutor's name because it's not necessary. Two, doesn't say her name because it's not necessary. Just he and she because it's very clear who is who. Even if there was two she's, it would be very clear based off of whatever the context given is, who is who. Like,
He indicted Soulakoutas with
know.
all the crimes she had committed in the last 10
it might
years,
be almost fully
including
AI,
homicide,
bro. You guys might,
fraud,
I might have been convinced with
forgery of wills, blackmail, and torture.
this. The clunkiness of the script reading and everything, like,
Soulakoutas continued to portray herself as a pious nun during her trials. She wore an Orthodox icon honoring the late Matthew, ordaining him with the name Saint Matthew, the new confessor.
right.
She rejected all charges against her, calling them satanic fictions. Maybe Mariam had convinced herself that
No, I'm not saying that the guy talking Like, when he shows himself talking, that's him talking. But part of me thinks the script might have been used by ChatGPT, and the images obviously are. I mean, look at this fucking shit. Why are there priests in nun robes, but not nun robes because they're priest robes, but nun robes? There's a guy, the guys on the right side have white hands, but one on the left has full white. The other on the right doesn't. The one in the middle between the two on the right is in a full black gown. Like there's, I don't know, it's just, yeah, the guy in the middle looks like Voldemort a little bit. It's just, yeah, it's just rough. Have I seen the video description? This woman on screen holds true stories like you wouldn't believe. She has been dubbed the most evil woman in the history of mankind, with both the appearance and profession of a full-time abbess. I mean, I think this is what he said at the start, but that also, this is just the intro, yeah. But also, we're kind of like, I think the whole script was kind of, I'm starting to think the whole script was asked by ChatGPT to make anyway, if I'm honest.
Everything she had done was in the name of religion.
Like, ChatGPT, give me an interesting story about a fucked up case. Mariam Solotakis, Mariam Solotakis, Mariam Solotakis.
You could say that Mariam had brought back the Salem witch trials, where innocent people were hanged to death, to let the church take over their property. She stood in the courtroom like a cold,
not really
heartless
why
monster, whose only aim was to satisfy her own greed.
Not really why they did that.
As she heard the charges brought against her, she would cross herself and make a prayer of vengeance to St. Matthew. She knew that she did not have any defense, no matter what legal loophole she tried to use. The defense attorney said that people who came into the monastery would take a vow of property. They would hand over all of their property to the monastery of their own free will. He claimed that the property was transferred to Mariam's name because the monastery did not have a legal setup. The enormity of Mariam's crimes resulted in 3 separate trials.
That is a lot.
The first trial was conducted in the years 1951 and 1952. The second one continued into 1953, and the third and last trial was concluded a few months before her death. She was convicted for 26 months after her first trial.
What is that, bro? Why is there a fucking table? What is that? Why, man? Like, how did you look at this and go, yeah, fuck yeah.
10 years after the second trial, and 4 consecutive months in her last trial. Mariam's sentence in 1951 came as a shock to Matthewites all across Greece. They held a rally to liberate their leader from the clutches of the legal system. They demanded that she should be released and returned to her rightful place. The police had to protect the Archbishop Spiridion. There was a dangerous possibility of the Calandrists kidnapping the Archbishop and demanding Mariam's release in prison. Mariam Solotakis was incarcerated in the Avrof prison located on Alexander's Avenue in Athens. She spent the last part of her life as isolated as her victims, but she did
to the street, down to the street. I don't care.
did not suffer the same end. The total length of her sentence was 14 years, but she only spent a year or so in prison before she fell ill. She was rushed to the hospital where she died at the age of 71. Solotakis had more than 400 followers when she was in power. Almost 500 people gave away their property to the monastery by drafting a will in Mariam's name. The same number of people died in the monastery due to disease, starvation, or torture. The Matthewite nurses continued to pray for the intercession of Holy Mariam, as they think she is the model of purity and piety. The Calandrists continued to thrive under new leadership. No one knows who took over from the formidable Mariam Solacutus. The woman who continued would vanish without a trace. They were adept at hiding their identity as well as their location. They revered Mariam Solacutus as their true saint and claimed that the male priests and monks were jealous of Mariam's success. When asked about the hundreds of deaths in the monastery, the Matthewites explained that the people who joined the church were already very old. The fact that they died was God's will, rather than Mariam's negligence. Mariam Solacutus left a deep mark on the pages of history. Many Greek writers have explored the life of the ruthless murderer who hid behind the veil of fate. Nina Kulataki explains the vindictive nature of the abbess in her book, Murderous, published in 2019, by saying, "It is only by happenstance that the monastery used the old Julian calendar rather than its revised form. Only a cunning, shrewd abbess like Solacutus would have had equal success, regardless of her brand of Greek Orthodox Christianity." Carrie Seagrave, who wrote an exhaustive account of Mariam Solacutus in her book, Woman, Serial, and Mass Murderers, stated that the prosecutors estimated the total number of victims as 177.
Such
At the end of the
unnecessary
day,
words in
the
a
story
sentence.
of Mariam Solacutus is a story of fate. Those who believe in Mariam would never think of her as a murderer. However, the overwhelming evidence stirs the faith of those who believe in humanity. The brutality with which Mariam ruled her monastery does not leave much to the
Here
imagination.
goes the shitty nun finger.
She used everything in her power to amass as much wealth as she could.
Except
As
it's
Eric
next to
Fromm
what I
says,
think might be a real image of
greed
a
is
bishop.
a bottomless pit that exhausts the person in an endless effort to satisfy the need without ever reaching satisfaction. Everything that could be done to torture people out of their wealth was done by Mariam. Her faith pushed her to the limits of fanaticism until she could not see black from white. She chose to shroud herself in a black habit because it was the color of her heart. The lesson remains that one should not judge a book by its cover, even if that cover is in the form of a nun's habit. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Mariam Solacutus, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.
What are you doing? What are you?
Oh shit, fart on my roommate's door, ha.
Did you see it? On the left side of the doorframe, barely visible on camera, a white translucent mist-like shape slowly creeps into frame. As it appeared.
Damn.
So, what do you think?
Damn. So, okay. You want to know how I can tell a little bit that this script was either generated by AI or not made by him. And he basically filmed himself one take just saying it all and then edited it. You know why? Because there's so much inconsistency in his speech pattern and sentence structure. Like there was a moment in the video where he was like talking about a person as if at the end of the sentence you should be like the person's name, but then paused in like a huge way as if there's a huge sentence break and then said her name and then continue the next sentence as if it's part of it. That's not how it works.
I'm so glad it's over. Anyways, were we almost 4 years?
Also, this
just a few months to go.
This thanks for watching
awesome,
line is so
Sneeg,
convincing
and
because
thanks for being such an awesome community, you freaks.
He talks in such a different way than how he talked the whole video. Like
The lesson remains that one should not judge a book by its cover, even if that cover is in the form of a nun's.
Listen to how naturally he talks in this sentence where he's just like clearly speaking as if he's talking to you.
Habit. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Mariam Solocutus, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.
That's just a genuine that's a total switch up. Exactly. Oh, God, I don't know. This was very disappointing. I do not want to watch more. Sorry. I don't mean to be so nitpicky, but at the same time, this is like my field of study, and I really there's just a lot going on here that is very disappointing. Just like the presentation talking, and then it's like you're presenting like it's a grade school report, and then very likely, I mean, absolutely AI generated images being thrown in, but very likely also generated script, because he talks the whole time as if it's like his first time reading it. And instead of just like doing it again or doing it a few lines at a time, it just seems like he just done. You know what I mean? Like he went from the start of the script to the end and then finished the recording and then edited it and was like, I did it. Instead of just being like, maybe I should, like, I don't think you should be using AI to create a script for a video anyway. There's so much wrong with that. But at least go over the script. Like, at least speak it a few times so you're not like, Mariam Solocutus went to the American to claim her property and got it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. That was a very interesting case, a very disappointing watch.